we are looking at a kind of World War III. In other words, he said it's a global canvas of a war of hybridity that is hybrid in a way we are not fully understanding. And he had some chilling things. For instance, the timing of the attack of the American-Israeli bombing of Iran. And you can see these things that they are as they would say in physics, they're vibrating sympathetically at the moment. And I find that a very useful tool, a very useful way to think of it, because particularly when you look at what's going on in the Western Balkans at the moment, and by the way, as usual, that the thing doesn't go to railway timetables, in that I think they've got real problems with Srpska at the moment. Whether they act, save the guy, or donate or not, is going to be a big thing. But I think that there is this scheme, and you can see enduring personalities, and they have remarkably similar modus operandi, modi operandi. The one that they mentioned, of course, is we hear a lot from him, and he's always negative, is Sergei Lavrov. And they said, really is, go back to the early Cold War days, he's the Andrew Gromyko of the very, very long-lasting foreign minister of the Southern, who was just known as Mr. Niet, the no. But Mr. Niet actually rather overplayed his hand. He was very jokey at Alaska at that meeting, because he suddenly sort of flashed open his jacket, his wind cheater, to show that he was wearing the old Soviet Union ice hockey international team a sweatshirt. In allegedly setting this up with Rubio. Rubio is no Witkoff in this way. He wasn't having anything of it. He knew nothing had changed, and that Russia was still bent on conquest and destroying Ukraine. Therefore, and I bet the three colleagues, money was not exchanged, that the thing won't happen in Budapest on the 28th. It will be, pardon my not French, but deep Latin. It will be postponed sine die. It will be, well, it's postponed. It's not cancelled. The stars didn't align, and it's very muddy and whatever. But that would be an embarrassment for Viktor Orban, because the suspicion was that the side play, the side dish, and a very big one of this, would be Putin going to Budapest and really, with as one of the colleagues was saying, that there will be planes full of goodies for Orban. And by golly, it would be another intelligence and otherwise propaganda penetration of the NATO EU space. But mind you, talking of the NATO and EU space, I think they've more or less written off Orban right now. And I think that's going to be very interesting. And one of the things you and I should be pursuing now is, I think, there's a realignment of Europe, of security Europe. And it's very, very interesting who's going to be at the top of the tree. And in the senior players there, the most difficult one is undoubtedly the UK.
Yeah. Well, this is where UK is in this bridging position between the United States and Europe, because Brexit has us out of Europe, but we're in NATO. We're also the only other Five Eyes or European Five Eyes member that's sitting there, which European countries are very jealous of. And within the EU itself, whilst there isn't a defence pact, the majority of EU countries are members of NATO, which there is a European defence element to NATO. But then there's a couple of players, Austria and Ireland, who are EU members who are not in that. Do you think Putin recognises all of these fraction points?
Ireland will never state it, but Ireland is in the Security Forum. It's so worried about asymmetry.
Yes, and the new head of the EU's military commission is Irish General Casey. And he now heads up the European military, even though Ireland itself doesn't contribute to a lot of military capability. But in looking at that, do you think Putin is sitting there in classical terms going, there's so many fracture points in what's going on in the West, this is going to be easy for me to spin things up and keep people running around in circles and allow me effectively to get on with what I want? And do you think a lot of the hybrid stuff that we've seen recently with drones over Germany and Denmark and Sweden, and intelligent ships over undersea cables, and various other things that are happening, do you think all of that is Putin just testing the ground?
Well, he's been doing that, but it's when he wants to go a step further, and it's quite clear that it could happen very soon, because if there are further incursions, the EU, NATO, the hardcore, and it would be around the Joint Expeditionary Force plus Germany, plus Finland, who are very, very strong indeed, and they could match anything in terms of the armored battlefield that very soon that Russia could put in the field. But it's what the probing really adds up to. What I fear is that it could spill over, because they could do a little green man job, putting in strange people in strange uniforms into Estonia. I think it's going to be the target, in the way that they did in Crimea in 2014. And I think it could trigger something quite quickly. It'll be a real test for Trump, for which Trump and the increasingly bizarre Pete Hegseth seem absolutely unprepared for, and they're distracted by all kinds of things. Obviously, Gaza, because he sent part of the A team off there, Vitkov and his son-in-law Kushner. But what is he doing with Venezuela? What is the CIA really up to? Venezuela, Colombia, particularly when you have a ranking commander, the commander of Southern Command. I believe he wasn't sacked. They said that he had been replaced. No, he didn't. He resigned. So what did he resign about? So Trump is all over the place, like an elephant trying to negotiate an ice skating rink at the moment. And I think that they've read the lessons. I think, key players, I mean, the obvious ones who are really making quite a lot of sensible noise, Mark Rutte, Kallas of Estonia, but the EU foreign minister, and very powerful figures, as it turns out, like Mette Frederiksen, the PM of Denmark. Their position is quite clear, that they think they are in danger, they're at great risk from Russia. But Frederiksen, of course, is having no truck with Trump, because he wants to bag part of Danish or Danish interest territory, Greenland. So therefore, we're building up air defense systems. We need it. And I wonder if the UK is learning from this. I fear not, that it needs quite close air defense systems against missile or even armed drone attack. And Frederiksen is having nothing to do with the Americans on that. It's innovating a lot of its own stuff, which it is doing with Ukraine, and it's not buying American, it's buying European. That's where we are going at the moment. What the report back to Trump and where Trump goes from this, I do not know, because it's pretty clear what the 2-hour conversation with Putin was about. I think it was on the 17th, and it was, look here, Donald, Tovarich, don't send tomahawks. And he was dead scared that he might have been tempted to do that. The thing that was frightening, I understand, from the subsequent conversation the day after with Zelensky, is that Trump talked to all of Putin's talking points.
Yep.
There's a funny
but
thing.
He's done that before. And your analysis about the little green men, I think you're right on that. But I see a different target, and we'll talk about this in a different program sometime. But I see the different target as being Ireland. But again, I threw that out there for something we'll talk about in the future. However, do you think what went wrong in the latest talks was we had Trump speaking to Putin, and almost immediately, the very next day, we had Trump speaking to Zelensky. And what didn't happen was what had happened beforehand, when you'd Trump with Putin in Alaska, Then you had the European and NATO leaders going and spending a lot of time with Trump and putting big effort in there. And then Trump, Zelensky, and Trump seems to change his mind. Now you haven't had that European influence. You haven't had that other global leaders and NATO leaders going in to try and reimplant certain things back in his mind again. And something like that has to happen. And do you think they need to very quickly get in a plane and go and see Donald Trump and sort him out before this Budapest, this meeting in Hungary? Yeah, Budapest, whether it happens or not.
No, I think it's a lost cause. I mean, because you have to go through the Alice in Wonderland logic of Trumpland there, and I don't think they can be bothered with it because they've got to go on supporting Ukraine. This is absolutely clear. Don't wait for America. And the message is that the intermediate range missiles, not that we've heard much about them, the Flamingo, but certainly the longer range drones are really having an effect. And this is where Putin is, I think, being very blind as to what the effect is. I mean, I've been reading Steve Rosenberg's, a press report from the Daily Press, and it's getting through that, that transportation is now affected, retail, gasoline and diesel is not so available. The intelligence services, by the way, have been remarkably silent in what the effect has been on the harvest, what there has been of it. It's 20% in Ukraine, which is big. But have they had the fuel for and the crews for the combine harvesters? We've been hearing stuff about that. This is where the Twitter sphere really does come into its own. 98% of it is 24-karat rubbish, but you just get these little glimmerings of what's going on, and it's the further edge. It's tomahawk range, but they can do it with other things, including with their own little green men. That when those sort of things, the big transmission lines of gas and oil, become even more vulnerable as the winter comes on, that's going to be the real test for Russia. And I'm afraid to say the message for Europe, the Germanys, the France, and even the UK, but Germany, France, and the Scandinavians have been particularly good, namely Denmark. They've got to arm up Ukraine for air defense, and that's the way they're going to build. Ukraine itself, it doesn't solve the problem for them because Ukraine has got a huge personnel problem, and we understand that. But they're staying in the fight, and they're staying in the fight in a way that I think constitutionally that is not quite appreciated in the European West, least of all in the United States. What Putin aims at cannot be done, will not be done by any independent sovereign government in Ukraine, which is the articles now enshrined in their constitution that they aspire to join NATO or EU, probably both. That is now a fundamental, the independence of Ukraine, which Mr. Putin, Russia recognized in the Budapest Agreement when Ukraine agreed to disarm nuclear arms.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.